Right, welcome to Real Estate Investor Talk. It's the show where we go beyond the headlines to bring you insights from the leaders shaping South Africa's property market. I'm your host, Neale Petersen, and today I'm joined by Smee. He's the CEO at Only Realty Property Group. They are a leading residential letting agency franchise group, and we'll be unpacking the South Africa's rising rent vesting trend. Rent where you live, buy where you can afford. Grant, welcome to the show. It's great to have you with us. To kick things off, could you just share a little bit about your background and the work that Only Realty has done in the property space?
Yeah, so originally I was am a property investor, so that's sort of where I come from originally, and then moved into the property services space, which is ultimately Only Realty, where we focus on managing investor properties. We manage 3,500 properties currently. We also sell properties, so that's part of the model. And we also then have a disruptor lead home as part of our group, which then sells properties for a fixed fee. So it's sort of that mix of providing professional investor services on the one side, as well as the sales services on the other side from an Only Realty perspective.
Excellent. So let's start off with the basics. For those that are unfamiliar with the term, how would you actually define rent vesting? I mean, what makes it different from traditional property investment?
So traditional property investment is really you sort of living in a home, and then you decide to buy a buy-to-let somewhere in an area where you're achieving good yield, and you place a tenant, and then you have either somebody manage or you manage that property yourself, and then you continue building that portfolio. Rent vesting really is the space of investing in your first property being an investment property, and then renting where you want to live. So, choosing lifestyle over paying a mortgage for the place you want to live. So the example would be investing in Joburg into the high yielding properties, and living in Cape Town and renting in the Atlantic seaboard as an example.
Okay, so why do you think rent vesting is resonating so strongly with younger buyers? Particularly we're seeing in Gen Z and younger millennials in South Africa.
So in years past, we saw people avoiding buying properties. So we had this generation rent, the millennials generation rent, really looking for flexibility and not being stuck to home loans. But I think what generation rent or that sort of space has realized, particularly sort of from 5 years ago, lockdown and COVID, is actually owning an asset is important. But they still wanted that flexibility to be able to move around, that sort of have that relative nomadic lifestyle. So rent vesting has really sort of come to the forefront, because I think people have realized now you can still invest in property, still have an asset, but it doesn't have to be your primary residence. And I think that's an important sort of distinction.
Absolutely. So you mentioned the Western Cape is leading the trend in South Africa. What are the factors that are driving rent vesting activity in that region specifically?
So I think the two factors really is the expense or the cost of living in Western Cape. It's actually cheaper to rent in certain areas, particularly like I mentioned, the Atlantic seaboard or the West Coast, where property prices are really expensive. Your starter home in the West Coast, you're looking at 3.5 million rand, whereas you rent that property out for 20,000 rand. So it is cheaper to rent than buy in those regions. But then again, those we still have quite a big investment market and opportunities to invest in property because of such high demand by people moving to the province.
Yeah, so how does rent vesting enable home buyers, particularly, to strike a balance between lifestyle and also their long-term financial goals?
Yeah, so I think it's important again that because they are not just continue renting and paying somebody else's bond, but they are investing in an asset, it does align with financial goals, because you sort of have an asset, hopefully that is yielding good yields, and that you're paying down. So you're building that sort of capital ownership over time, but then you are achieving sort of the lifestyle goals within a budget, where if you are doing a property, you're renting a property that is well within your budget, and you're still achieving your lifestyle sort of ambitions as well.
So many assume buying is better than renting. People always say bricks and mortar. Can you unpack why rent vesting may actually be the smarter move in today's economic climate?
Yeah, I mean, I think, particularly again, because of the last few years, we are certainly looking at, lifestyle as a first choice. Lifestyle and security are the first two choices people are making in terms of where they want to live. But then still having that asset, so being able to invest in areas that they wouldn't necessarily want to live or need to live, but where there certainly are higher yields and good yields and also good capital appreciation. So, if you're working, again, that sort of more nomadic lifestyle, or have made the lifestyle choice to live at the coast, or actually outside of the more dense economic areas, you can still invest in those economic hubs and achieve your financial goals from from a property investment point of view, and still achieve your lifestyle goals that you have and live where you need to, or
Yeah, so
want to rather.
yeah, I mean, we're seeing, globally, I mean, we actually seeing Rentvesting growing fast. I mean, especially you look in Australia, United States. So how does South Africa's adoption compare, and what's actually fueling the local growth of that?
So the adoption is slow. Certainly is slow. I think maybe it's just a sort of tradition in South Africa that you own your first home. The sort of the model and the thinking is you study, you get a job. Next thing, you buy a home, you move into that home, you live, you pay a bond. So that sort of traditional sort of lifestyle is something that sort of is changing, but it's taking time to change. We're certainly seeing the escalation of Rentvesting in Australia and the US, and also in the UK. I think what is the distinction there is obviously they've got strong currencies, and that Rentvesting isn't only renting where they live and buying in other parts of that same country. It could be renting where they want to, for example, renting in Sydney, but investing in properties in the UK, as an example, or other parts of the world. So it's not just a local sort of investment sort of strategy. It's more of a global space for them. But the drive in Australia and the US is particularly been over the escalation of house prices. I saw an article that house prices in Australia have increased 500% over the last several years, which
Unbelievable.
is insane. And that just passes around the market, but they still want to buy property. So that's driving that rental market. So that's almost out of necessity, not out of choice. But in South Africa, we have that choice, and I still think it's a smart choice. Your first home, for me, should always be an investment property, and then your second home, your third home later on should be where you decide to make a primary residence. So I think people are seeing the value of it, the value of being able to rent and have your maintenance paid, your levies paid, your rates paid by the owner, but living in really nice spaces for less money.
Yeah, some good advice there. So, what are some of the biggest misconceptions or mistakes that you see first-time rent investors make?
So, I mean, I think the first one is overspending on the rental. So, you go and buy this property, it's doing good yield, you have a tenant in there, and then you go and rent a really expensive property. You go and rent a villa and actually blow your budget. So I think that's the first thing, just making sure you're not overspending on the rental. The second one is ignoring the cost of actual home ownership. So don't forget, when you buy a rental investment property, there may be vacancies, there may be maintenance costs associated with that, and levies are something you need to consider. We can see across the country at the moment increasing rates and taxes from all the municipalities, and actually special levies is a main concern as well when you're buying two sectional type of complexes. And the last thing is just making an emotional decision versus actually financial decisions. Even though you are buying your first home and your first property and you are renting, the decision needs to be almost clinical and Excel spreadsheet based versus emotional.
Okay, I think that's also a good way of putting it. So just walk us through, some of the key financial considerations of Rentvest. I know you've touched on some already. Should weigh before diving in, from returns to risk, if there's any other aspects that you can add to that.
Yeah, I think it is important that when you assess a property that you're going to invest in fully. So as an investment property, look at the yield, look at the returns, look at the costs, understand the risks. On the bond side, understand what your interest rate's going to be. Can you negotiate a better interest rate? If you do have multiple properties, there are a few products out there where you can get a combined product from, for example, ABSA. I think Nedbank just launched one. So you need to look at the financing options that you have available for yourself. On the rental side, again, what are you signing up for? What sort of term lease? Can you negotiate a better lease by signing a longer term lease? because this is purely, like I say, it's a financial decision. So you're really driving the numbers. You've got to drive the numbers down, and you've got to make sure that your costs remain low. So which is very, very important. Plan for your tenancy gaps, the gaps between your tenants, and then always include or just have a really strong budget and budget process.
So do you see this as a long-term trend? Or a stepping stone for young buyers entering the property market?
Yeah, I certainly hope it is. I think it's important that it is certainly a stepping stone. You've got buyers in, for example, in Cape Town, they're looking at getting into the market, can't afford 2 million rand apartment, but could potentially afford a 1 million rand apartment in Joburg, which is providing a good yield. So I think to get into the property market is important for youngsters to take this opportunity to do it and understanding what rentvesting is. I think it's a good way to move forward, and I think it should be actually the way most people should get into the property market as a starting point.
Okay, and I think you're sharing this, and it's new to a lot of South Africans. But how's the rise in remote and hybrid work influence the rentvesting trend, especially when it comes to location choices?
Yeah, I think it's sort of actually probably one of the key driving factors behind it is people understanding again that they can work remotely, work in places where they live. You see a lot of these. Well, South Africa is about to have a digital nomad visa. They announced that last year. There are digital nomad visas all over the world. So this digital nomad sort of lifestyle is being seen more and more often on social media. And I think that's really driving this idea that you can live somewhere, rent a property for lower cost, but then own where you come from, the market you best understand. So I think it actually is probably the one of the key driver forces behind rentvesting.
So what types of properties or areas are you currently offering, which are actually offering the best returns for rent investors in South Africa at the moment?
So there's a few. There's student accommodation is obviously this big buzzword for a long time, and that's where you've got your multi-tenanted properties where you're renting out individual rooms to students. That's a really good space at the moment. There's some affordable spaces, particularly in Joburg and university towns that you can do that in. Your 2-bedroom flats, again in high demand economic areas, Port Elizabeth and East Rand, West Rand of Joburg and Gauteng are really good areas. So you really need to look where yields are at its highest and where your competition is potentially at its lowest, and demand is going to be permanently there. So employment zones is really key. So my feeling and sense is, Gauteng, as always, parts of Pretoria, parts of Joburg, East and West are affordable. I speak to PE is a really good space as well to invest in. I wouldn't necessarily look to do a buy-to-let investment in the Atlantic Seaboard as an example. But again, that's the place you go and live and rent and enjoy the lifestyle while you achieving your rental returns.
Yeah, excellent. So and I know you touched on this a little bit already, how should aspiring rent investors approach financing? Are there specific loan products or strategies that work better for this model?
Yeah, so I think, with any loan in South Africa, our flexibility around mortgages is relatively difficult. Internationally, you get very, very flexible and interesting products around the space. But looking to just, make sure that you get as low an interest rate as possible. Don't gear or overgear your property. So don't necessarily go for 100% loan. You want to try and keep your costs down as low as possible. So look to have a deposit for your property, and then making sure, everything comes down to costs. So on the financing side, as you grow your portfolio, again, a few of the banks are coming to the party from a buy-to-let perspective. But what I would say is also, again, look at your costs. Importantly, in sectional title is your levies. Who's managing that complex? What are the levies looking like? Because that actually can be a deal killer for you completely. But from a finance perspective, traditional mortgage, protect your credit score. Make sure you've got your affordability. Make sure you're checking all the boxes to achieve that bond when you do apply for it.
Spoken like a true investor there. So Grant, finally, just what are the top 3? Maybe give some practical tips or some guide, for anyone considering rentvesting in 2025 and beyond.
Yeah, so I touched on them a few times, but I think the math is vitally important. That Excel spreadsheet with all the detail. Don't underestimate the costs. Sometimes overestimate the costs. Add in margin for error. Add 10% extra just in case. So doing the math is vitally important. when you're making the lifestyle choice of where you want to rent, don't over rent, don't overpay for rent, or find ways to offset that. Maybe share a property in that area with somebody else who's doing the same sort of thing to minimize that cost as much as possible, because that is ultimately going to be the emotional decision, your lifestyle choice. And then always plan for risk, I think, is vitally important. So just making sure that you have all your ducks in a row in case your tenant doesn't pay, in case you have to evict them, in case there's a special levy, just in case, all the risks around that. Make sure you've got your insurances in place for your investment.
Excellent. Grant Smee, CEO of Only Realty, thank you for joining us and sharing your insights on Rentvesting. And to our viewers, thanks for tuning in to Real Estate Investor Talk. Till next time, I'm Neale Petersen. Stay informed and stay invested.